The idea of a partial flood was something that I was completely unaware of for a really long time. So can you talk a little bit about like building the case that the flood was only partially covered the earth, what's going on there, stuff like that?
Yeah, so I think this is pretty evident in places like Genesis 8. One thing you need to remember about Genesis, though, is that it uses hyperbolic language. It talks about the flood as, this sort of all-encompassing thing, like it destroys all the land. But that happens elsewhere in Genesis. Like, for example, it talks about during the days of Joseph, all came to buy bread from Joseph. Okay, we don't actually think people were coming from, the Mesoamerican region to buy bread from Joseph. It's just referring to various areas that people were coming to buy bread. This is also evident considering that Jacob, his own father, didn't go to buy bread. I mean, he stayed behind. So we don't have to take the flood account as literally. It's hyperbolic in how it talks about the extent of the flood. And there are indications of this in Genesis 8. So, for example, it talks about, it says the ark came to rest on the mountains of Ararat, and the mountains were seen. Tops of mountains were seen. Okay, so the flood has receded to a point where they can see actual mountains now. Well, what happens next? Well, Noah released some birds, and they fly around and have to return. What does it say? Well, Genesis 8 says they returned to the ark because the waters were still on the face of the whole earth. Well, wait a minute, I thought verse 5 said tops of mountains were seen. Why is it saying the water is still on the face of the whole earth after that? It isn't. There's mountains that you can see. And I bring this up to young earth creationists, and they don't really have good replies to that. They just sort of take that later verse hyperbolic, but the previous verse is hyperbolic. Some try to say that, well, the tops of the mountains were seen under the waters. Like he could see down them under there, and okay, that creates other problems because if he was on the tippy top of Mount Ararat, okay, doves cannot fly at such a high altitude. Olive trees cannot grow at such a high altitude. They have to grow at much lower elevations. So it's very unlikely they would have actually been that high up. And how are they going to get down from Mount Ararat, too? People can only get up there today with special equipment and climbing these high mountains. I mean, you just can't walk up there on a hike. It takes some pretty good effort to get all the way to the top. So I think it's far more likely that this was a local event. I mean, Noah, the ark came to rest somewhere in the north around the mountains of Ararat. I think it's more likely Ararat than Ararat. They landed in that general region. He could see the mountains. He wasn't really sure how far they were, so he released birds to see if they could return to him or not. If they're too far away, the dove is going to have to return to him. And so he used that to measure the receding waters of the flood. So I think that's kind of indicated in Genesis 8. This is not a global event. He just sort of landed at some low-lying plain area, and he could just see the mountains of Ararat in the distance.